and it's that scene in the car when they're driving, and she insists on driving, and he's popping, he's eating, spitting the seeds out the window, and it's like this. They annoy each other, but they also find each other intriguing enough to keep talking.
Hmm.
And there's the theme of the movie. Will they or won't they get together? Right.
Hello, writers and crafters. I'm Valerie Isan,
And I'm Eric Mertz.
and this is episode 180 of the podcast. It is March 26th, 2025, as we record this. And today we're talking about Bromance, how Dumb and Dumber and When Harry Met Sally are the same screenplay.
Same thing,
Same thing. Thank
just different
you.
names.
Thank you to our existing patrons for believing in our work offline and here in the podcast. You can become a patron of the arts at patreon.com/Valerie Isan and patreon.com/Strange Air Stories. And both of those are going to see some new invigorating
Content.
content
Yep.
and stuff coming soon. More on that later. Announcements, author updates. It's been a couple weeks since we've met. So I went
Yeah.
to Anderson Island for the Island Arts group, and I taught a workshop called Aligned Author. It was a workshop on intuitive planning and strategy, and I did that, and that was so amazing. They covered all my expenses. They put Ali and I up in this
Wow.
amazing VRBO that was right on the Puget Sound and had, like you could see the mountain was just right there in front of the window. And we actually arrived on a full moon night. That was the night of the lunar eclipse. So we
Oh,
stayed
wow.
up and they had this little fireplace in the living room. So we stayed up and watched the lunar eclipse. The next day we went
Sounds like a Grateful
hiking.
Dead story. It sounds like a Grateful Dead
It
story.
was really fun. It was such a great
Everybody I've
experience. And
everybody I've
everybody
ever
on
met
the island was
goes,
so nice. There was a reading
yeah,
on
yeah, this is a
Saturday
Grateful Dead
and
story.
a Grateful Dead story.
Anytime you meet anybody who's been to a Dead show, they always went. It was a full moon. It was on
Oh,
the anniversary of something. The people were great. They got a free ticket. It's like all the goodness in the world is in the parking lot of a Dead show. You just happen to get that experience on an
right.
island. So
Yeah, it
yeah,
was
it's like
so
the opposite of
awesome.
Lost. You had the opposite of the TV show Lost. That's really
That's
cool.
funny. So I am teaching another workshop at Wordcrafters on the 5th. So that's coming up in like less than
Wow.
2 weeks. It's on
Wow.
memoir, unlocking the heart of your memoir. So you can go to wordcrafters.com, or is it .org? I'll put the link in the show notes. You can register there. It is from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. all day long. So
Wow.
that's going to be super fun. And
They lock
what
you in? Do
else?
they give
They
you
lock
like
me in.
you get a bathroom break and a lunch break in there, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
And there's always chocolate there. They're really good about providing
I
chocolate.
I still have the chocolate that they gave me from the oh, maybe
What?
they're listening.
Dude,
I
I
shouldn't
eat that
say
in the
it.
car on the way home. Like
Well, here's the thing. I had three
the whole
bars,
bar.
four bars. I got four of them. I ate one of them on the way home.
Okay.
I think I had one of them
You've
within a week,
redeemed
but then
yourself, Eric.
one of them got buried in the freezer, and then I was like, rummaging around in the freezer, and I'm like, "What's this?" Oh, I forgot all about it, and it was the best of all of them. So,
That's awesome.
yeah,
I am, my birthday is tomorrow, so I'm going to be 51.
late arriving gifts, early arriving gifts, just same money, people.
Just yeah, I'm taking the day off tomorrow, getting a massage, going out for a nice birthday dinner with some friends.
Mm.
And then I have the weekend off, the whole weekend off, which is not happened in since before Christmas, man. It's
Wow.
been a long minute since I've had well, excepting last weekend when I was on the island, but so yeah, I traded shifts with somebody at the bookstore. So I've got Saturday and Sunday off. We're going to go to the coast on Saturday to take the dogs running on the beach. Um, and and then Sunday I'm deliberately doing nothing. Probably there'll be lots of hot tubbing and, mimosas. sleeping in. So
Solid plan. Solid
that is my
plan.
birthday plan. Then the following
Solid
weekend is
plan.
the Wordcrafters workshop. And I just signed up with it's a program called Abundant and Ambitious with Samantha Daly. She does business coaching. So I am in the process of going down to part-time at the bookstore in May and a little bit in April, like I can see the April schedule is starting to work out. I can see him like drafting it right now and it's I can kind of gauge what my schedule is going to be like in April and hopefully May will be even less. So that'll the business coaching and the going part-time and the ghost writing and the coaching and the editing, like it's all coming to this delicious head. It's on the cusp of greatness. I'm really excited about all of that. So that's happening. What else is new in my world? um I think that's probably it for now.
Hmm. All right.
My son
Okay.
works, one of my sons works graveyard. So he gets off at 6 o'clock in the morning and he doesn't drive. So he always takes a Lyft or a taxi to and from work. And that's kind of expensive. But if you
Yeah.
think about how expensive it is to have a car and registration and a driver's license, I just had to go get my new real ID from the DMV. Do you have one of those yet?
Not yet.
The
Guess I have to get
deadline
one.
is like May something. So,
I
yeah,
can't handle any more deadlines.
no
No
more
more deadlines.
deadlines. No more deadlines.
Please don't.
Anyway, he gets off at
Please.
6 o'clock in the morning. So, um, next in a couple weeks, his birthday, um, is coming up. So I'm picking him up from work at 6 o'clock in the morning as a birthday
Oh
present
boy.
and taking him to, breakfast at some diner, whatever's
I thought you were
open
gonna
at
say
six
taking him
o'clock in the
home. Just
morning.
I
No, I'm going to take
thought
him out
that
to
was the gift.
breakfast and yeah.
Nice. Nice.
So, and then I'll go to work that same day. So that's kind of crazy.
Very.
But
I love
anyway,
it.
the sun is shining. It's supposed to rain tomorrow, but the last couple days it's been sunny here. That's been awesome for my mood. And um, yeah, things are just, I'm really excited about stuff happening. April's going to be freaking amazing. So that is my update. What about you, dude? What's your author update?
I I don't have quite the sun. I don't have quite the sunny. I mean, I it's been sunny and warm here, which was great. It's fun taking dogs for a walk when they like, they're like the puppies go out and they're like, "What is this? Oh my gosh." I love that like newly limber, like newly, yeah, that part of it's been great. I don't know. Spring break is a little tough. There's just it's
Oh,
so
that's
many
right.
spring break has been its own thing. I won't go there. It's just been its own thing. Um, no, I mean it's been a similar busy, just from a marketing sense. I've been, really like I don't want to say scrambling to keep up, but it's been a long process of like, just um, running a marketing like running a business with effective marketing creates its own like joys, like things are working, and also like wow, you actually have to commit a lot more time to kind of landing clients or bringing people home, having exploratory phone calls, which is just not something that I've ever had to like. I have to look at my schedule every week and say, oh, when can I slot in? I need to be able to slot in this number of phone calls and this number of like actual inquiries. Um, and just for like 30 seconds on how it works, like the marketer that I work with has decreased the number of inquiries that I get. Like I used to get a lot more email inquiries and phone calls, but they were not things that I would take seriously. I'd get a lot of phone calls that were like, "Hey, my brother's in prison and his the lawyer screwed him over. Can we write a book that screws the lawyer over? I'll pay you when I get paid." And there was a lot of these things that were like, I sorry, that's just not, so I was committing time it's spinning my wheels. And now, like, I get phone calls almost every day from extremely valid leads and interested parties with real questions and the potential to work together. So that's like a whole nother like just level of commitment that's been welcome. And also
Hmm.
like, now I have to like really, it's not the CEO hat. I like how you always say the CEO. It's not the CEO hat. It's not the I don't know what hat it is. It's sort of like the customer service hat. Um,
Hmm.
which I'm good at, but I'm also like, wow, I have to do this a lot more, and there's a lot on the line, you know. Um, so anyway, that's been a big adjustment, and that's one I'm like I'm excited to. I always have that like there's a new demand business wise, and it takes a little while to integrate it. But once it integrates, like that's kind of the good feeling. Like once I get the machine rolling and
Hmm.
things are smooth in this way, it'll be like, ah, this is good. I can do this. But right now, it's like a lot of figuring out how this will all work together.
Hmm.
Stay tuned.
For
There's a lot less writing in the writing business these days than there is CEOing.
you.
I'll say
Mm.
that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just been like, yeah.
Do you want to
Whew.
talk about your Patreon? I just got an email on your
No, how
email
about we do
list.
that? Well, starting on the April 1st, I know there's an auspicious element to that day. Um, I will be relaunching Patreon under the same name, same link. You can go to the same place to find stories, but now the stories, rather than being kind of random witness accounts to paranormal activity in and around Canyon County, which is the fictitious setting for my novel series, I will be doing a prequel series of novellas um, for so in a nutshell, my main character, August Melville, sheriff of Whistler's Grove, a fictitious city in Central Oregon, is a skeptic. This general story arc of my series is him going from skeptic to believer. Um, but his sidekick is a newspaper writer who is a believer. And he comes into the series as a full-fledged believer. And I have toyed over the years with just how did he become a believer? Like, what is his story? Um, what was his path? And I didn't want to tell the same story that I'm writing now. So I wanted to tell it a little different. So these are going to be one a month. There's going to be novellas, short stories, kind of longer. I guess you'd call them novelettes, like longer short stories, full-fledged novellas that will tell sort of an episodic view of how Gilbert Sandoval went from small town reporter to obsessive paranormal uh, he's obsessively on the path of writing a book about the paranormal, and but this is his path to belief. And
Hmm. That's cool.
fun. Yeah, I think the path to belief is a fun one to write, and this one will be a lot different than will go off a lot different than previous writing. It will, it'll have the same feel, but like there's a lot, and I think the execution will be different. That's my joy in writing it, really, is that like it's just I get to execute it differently. I get to, kind of articulate ideas I like in a different way, and that's been fun. So
Awesome.
stay
Very
stay
cool.
tuned.
Stay tuned. All right. What are you reading?
So I had a meet cute. We're going to talk about that in a moment. I had a meet cute in a bookstore about a month ago and I told you this story, and you were like, "Oh, that's just like normal. That happens in a bookstore all the time." Um, so your jaded bookstore life didn't deter me. I think it was a fun meet cute. I thought it was fun, and I had this patron just like recommend to me a book called I think it said Jerrig. Um, it's a fantasy series by an author named Stephen Brust, who, as I've kind of gone in, like it's the classic 70s paperback science fiction, the kind of stuff you'd find on the shelves, probably of a of a five and dime back in the day. And Stephen Bruss was like a notable sci-fi author and fantasy author from the 70s and the 80s, and he's kind of lost to time. But this man that I met in the bookstore was very convincing that I needed to buy this book. In fact, I feared for my life and safety if I didn't buy the book because he was kind of standing over my shoulder. It was the most awkward browse I've ever had. Um, it's like, like, and the guy working behind the counter is like, "Hey, man, I don't know what to do.
I've
I've
never
got a
read it.
phone. I can call. I don't know what to say, but so it was. So I ended up buying it. It was definite. It's definite. It's good. It's good. I enjoy it. There's like 19 books in this series, and I'm now in email contact with the person who recommended me the book, and they keep asking how I'm enjoying it. And
What's the
um,
first title? Do you remember?
it's called Jereg,
How do you
um,
spell that?
Jhereg, and the series is called Vlad Taltos. And I'm looking at the Wikipedia, the Goodreads page right now. Looks like there's a ton of these books. But it's good. It's like, I don't want to say it's like breezy. I think anytime somebody calls something like it's breezy, it makes it sound like it's not good writing. But it's just that like it's not Brandon Sanderson style.
It's
It's not like pushing
accessible.
you in. It's accessible. It's not pushing you into the deep end of like some lore. It's like a guy in a bow and arrow in the opening scene trying to figure out how to kill his food. You're like, oh, I could relate to this, and
Yeah,
then you're just ripping through the tail. So
nice.
I'll take that.
Well, I was
What about
firmly
you?
into In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. It's a literary memoir that's told in really interesting ways. And
Hmm.
but it jumped this. I had another book that needed to jump the stack, so I'm like three-quarters the way through of In the Dream House. Um, and I am now reading The Girl from the Grand Hotel, which is a book club book by
Mm,
Camille Aubray.
mm.
And then I'm conducting an interview at the bookstore for an author event for Martha. I don't know how to pronounce her name yet, so I'll have to learn that. It's Gies. Um, and so her memoir I need to read as well by the end of April. So I've got
I'd
like
say that Geese.
Geese. Okay, Martha Geese.
I'd say Martha Geese, but like I wouldn't say that to her. I would say Martha.
And then
Yeah,
have
and
her
then have
fill
her.
in the. I'll do that
Yeah, yeah.
before I get on stage. All right.
Yeah, and if you
So,
don't, you can always say it's like, "Oh, you have a very interesting last name. Where does your last name come from?" And then they'll explain it, and then you'll give them the fun story of like, how they
there you go.
yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Any tidbits?
Well, we're gonna talk about scripts. And
Okay.
so I'm gonna give like if you want one of the best things to do if you're gonna write screenplays is read screenplays because they don't look or feel like um like fiction. So if you've never looked at one, you need to look at them. And I will tell you a good place to get them is called Simply Scripts. If you want to just open up a screenplay, look at it, there's a lot of caution when it comes to reading screenplays. That's a whole nother sub subject to talk about. But like you open up a script, kind of figure out where it came from, and
Simply
and just give it a
scripts.
read. Just Simply Scripts is a good one.
Okay.
Been a bunch of others, and they're variable. Um, there's variable like quality to them. I guess the one thing to say is if you're going to read screenplays, you need to make sure that you're reading screenplays that are like actually look like the screenplay that you would get as a producer or director.
Hmm.
Oftentimes you'll see like gift books, and there's probably a bunch on my shelves. Like, it's a bound gift edition of a screenplay. That's not a screenplay. That's not the one you want to read. You don't want to go into Barnes and Noble and just look at scripts and pick them off the shelves in the book and those because those aren't the way it's going to look. You can go into the story, which is another place. Simply Scripts and Drew's Scriptorama are the three that you'll find the best opportunity to read a screenplay in its produced form. It should look rough like a PDF. It shouldn't look like something polished. So anyhow, but just tool around on the internet. That's the tip is like if you're intrigued by it, go out and just you've got to read. I'm not going to give you a number, but you've got to read a few before you write them because it's just yeah, it would be like trying to write a rock song without ever listening to the rock radio. You have to just read it to me.
Yeah. Read in your genre. That's kind
Yeah.
of goes without saying. Can you drop
Yeah.
the
Well, it doesn't go without saying because I think people assume like I don't know. I think people assume and I've got someone in my world who's now like burning me up because they started writing a script without reading a script and now I'm like go read a script before you try to, before you try to write one. So
what
yeah,
were the names of the other? I only have Simply Scripts written down. You said there was
Uh,
three.
Drew's Scriptorama is a good one. Drew's Scriptorama is good because it'll tell you the like where the screenplay comes from.
Hmm.
Um, and so it'll tell you like this is a production draft or this is a spec draft or this is an early draft. So that's important. Scott Meyer's website Go Into the Story, which as I now am looking at it, it's a Medium page. You can still find like he's one of the best, but he's got a list. I'm looking at like there's hundreds of screenplays here you can look at.
Okay.
Um, and
I'll
the
put a
other
f
tip I'll just give before we jump in is like read scripts from movies you've watched before and read scripts from movies you haven't seen before. Because I think there's this like it's valuable to read the thing like to read the movie you've seen before because then you can say, oh, that's how that scene played out
hmm.
on the page. Um, and then read ones that you haven't read before because or seen before because then like how does like what pictures do you get in your head from the script so you can kind of see how like that because there's a lot of good screenplay goes into like
Hmm.
understanding how that works. So
Cool. All
all right.
right. Let's talk about bromance because you are telling me and have told me before that like buddy movies follow
Basically,
the same beats as a romance.
basically, yes. So if you look at the way in general scripts are, somebody says I have a rom-com, I know that it's going to be between 90 and 100 pages. That's because that's 90 to 100-minute movie. And similarly with a buddy comedy, it's Dude, Where's My Car, Dumb and Dumber, um, any of those movies are about 90 to 100 minutes. So it's the similar length. And why length matters is that it's the same beats exists in almost every story. It's just in Gladiator, which is 2.5 hours, a Scorsese movie, which is 3 hours. Those beats are, you know, it takes longer to get to that beat than it does in this. So if you're looking at scripts, like it's important to like if you're going to compare them, um, scripts of the same length execute beats at about the same time. And so that's why buddy comedies and romantic comedies kind of play off the same structure, right? Because they're similarly length. Now, how those stories come together is what we'll talk about. All right. And like how very similar the characters are in that story. Let's start like the first of those two principles is that of those principles that the characters in these movies are always odd couples, right? I
Okay.
mean, Harry and Lloyd, it's funny we're going to talk about two movies with Harry. I realized that when I was sitting down and
Oh.
thinking about this. Like Harry and Lloyd are both lovable idiots, right? That's kind of why we're watching it. It's because we love they're lovable and they're dullards. But like Harry's slightly more sensible than Lloyd, right? So there is this sort of like there is the ability to push pull. There's an odd couple element to that story. And it's the same thing in the beginning of When Harry Met Sally, right? Harry's styles himself as a realist. She sees him as cynical. She styles herself as sort of particular and optimistic. He styles her as being very maybe naive. So there's always that like internal character push pull, they're close enough in character that they would be in the same place and they'd get along, but they are both like kind of the opposite end of the same spectrum.
Okay.
So the Harrys, and I mean, they work out that way. So that's the number one way in which they're similar. These are, I think these are similar. The odd couple dynamic is at the base of that story. If you're going to write them, you have to have that kind of odd couple feeling. And it just keeps going. Go through. I mean, I always think of Dude, Where's My Car? That movie, and Harry. What's the one? Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle. There's like a buddy comedy. These guys belong in the same story world, but they are just contrasted enough that there's going to be tension, and that leads to the main. There's the sort of like meet cute feel, right, where these characters find each other, and there's like this connection early on that like we see, like when Harry and Sally get together, there's that in the beginning, there's the whole, they're going to go drive together. There's enough intrigue between the characters that it sparks the long-term relationship, right? It makes them memorable to each other. Same thing with Harry and Lloyd. That also sets up the whole idea of the will they, won't they tension, right? I mean, that's the central through line in both of these stories. Harry and Lloyd's friendship, can it survive the stupidity that that they foist upon each other, right? I mean, it puts them into trouble, all kinds of trouble, and it forces each of them to do increasingly stupider things, or like being more vulnerable to the last one's, idiocy. Can their friendship survive, right? And the same thing with Harry and Sally. Can Sally like embrace realism in life enough to see Harry as a viable romantic partner? And can Harry like soften his cynical side? Anybody who's watched that movie knows Harry reads the last book of the page of a book before he reads the beginning, because he wants to know how it ends, because he might die before the book is over, right? Can he soften that edge enough to bring a more optimistic person into his life? And so that's where that will they won't they tension comes together. It's absolutely. And so we need to know what that will they won't they tension needs to appear really early on in each of those stories.
Okay.
We have to have that sense of the will they won't they tension, and that it happens when Harry and Sally part in New York City for the first time. There's that moment when they're standing. I don't know the name of the park. I can picture it in my head, but they're standing there kind of like, okay, see you later. Okay, it's been real. Like there is a sense that like these characters are attracted and intrigued by one another, but will they or won't they go for a cup of coffee at this point? So you need that moment of like they've met, they've connected, but then there is that lost opportunity.
So I'm
That's
breaking in here. So you said at the
do
beginning
it.
of the movie. So I'm still thinking like novel, translating this to novel. So like if you're talking screenplay, what page on the screenplay, what percentage of the story
So
in
right.
are you? Is this first
So I think
chapter stuff or is this like
well, if you break a script into acts, you have at page 30 is the break between act one and act two. This is
mhm.
on a 90 to 100-minute script. And the break between act two and three is 75 to 85. You can argue that 75 to 85 is no man's land. Um, but by page five, right? In a script, page five is traditionally when the theme of the story is stated, right? That's when the theme of the story is stated, and it's not like the theme of this story is, it's not that. It's you can see in the scene, either in dialogue or in subtext, that the theme of the story has been expressed, right? It's the moment that we know that Harry and Sally have this, like, there's this connection, and it's that scene in the car when they're driving, and she insists on driving, and he's popping, he's eating, spitting the seeds out the window, and it's like this, they annoy each other, but they also find each other intriguing enough to keep talking.
Hmm.
And there's the theme of the movie. Will they or won't they get together, right? And
Okay.
I forget the 5 minute mark in in what it is in Dumb and Dumber, but it's a very similar moment of like there's I think there's an early kind of escapade that they're involved in, and it's like is this gonna is this gonna kill them or their friendship? We're gonna see,
So you
and we
said
know that early.
5 minute mark. Do you mean page five?
Page five, which is 5 minutes into the script, you get
Oh,
that's your.
okay.
So
Okay.
you'll see that. Watch any movie within with 5 to 8 minutes, you have the theme of the story stated in some way or another. If you didn't see it, it might have been subtext. If you saw it, then the writer did their job. But you always have to know what the theme of the story is at that point. By
Okay.
page 12, the sort of break, the sort of break from um, I like to think of it as like this is where the story diverges, where like now I can see this, like I can see what the I don't know how to I don't know. I think of it kind of like the opportunity to easily solve that problem has passed, and now the story's like real problem starts. It's when Harry and Sally return to each other. They see each other. They're older now. They're adults. They have this like um they're a little more entrenched. Their like relationship um quirks are not just childlike anymore. They've become adult and ingrained, but there's also this friendship. So like that's what page 12 promises, right? Is like, okay, they're going to be friends. They still have these differences and go. Will they or won't? We're still on will they or won't they as a theme, but now like we're going to see what will they or won't they look for the next 75 minutes until they have sex and it gets weird and then they have to really solve the problem. So there's always that crisis point when the theme is like executed uh, improperly. We'll get there. Um, so all of this sets up the other trope that exists in all of these stories, right? And that is, well, there's an emotional bonding, and we talked about that, right? Each of these stories revolve around an absolutely deep bond and friendship between the characters. There's usually some signal early in the story um, that tells us that like these people matter. And Harry and Lloyd are buddies. They're they are the best of friends. And Harry and Sally are young and young and seeking marriage. I mean, they both want to get married, and they are now like kind of going through that question of like um uh how do you stay acquaintances while also you know how do you connect as acquaintances and friends while also looking at like looking at the world for potential partners. So,
Hmm.
but there's an emotional bond, right? And I guess this is slightly where those emotional bonds differ slightly, because the emotional bond that Harry and Sally create, and in most rom-coms early on, is we are awkward friends, and do we stay friends? Um, Usually in a buddy comedy that like we are friends. Can the adventure of the story survive the friend? Can the adventure of the story destroy our friendship? That's usually so. It's similar. It's similar. Like there's a test of the friendship and the emotional bond. It's just one of them is romantic and the other one is usually circumstantial or hijinks oriented. But it's the same. It's a very similar test. So that emotional bonding, if you want to talk about structure of the screenplay, that emotional bonding, we see the root of that emotional bonding usually between page 12 and 25, right? That's what you would call sort of like setting up the sort of A, B, and C stories, the main plot lines, the subplots, the sort of tangential circumstances that the characters are going to encounter. That happens between 12 and 25.
And
That
that's when
is
the emotional
kind of
bonding is tested. Is that what you said?
no, that's when the emotional bonding is depicted. Like you see, that's when Harry and Lloyd, you see, I think what did they run a dog grooming business? Like we see that they have this connection. We see they have this like, um, they work here's how we work well together, or we're going to show you all the different ways we work well together. And in pages 12 and 25, like that's when Harry and Sally, like they've come back together in New York City. their friendship has not been tested. We just kind of see that their friendship works, right? We see that their friendship, this is when she's moving into an apartment and she's helping him or he's helping her. And, there's just this like, it's kind of that Woody Allen moment where it's like, here's how these characters get along. We're going to enjoy watching them get along for a little bit. And you need that, right? Because you can't just get into the page 25, page 25 and 30, there's this break into Act 2 from Act 1. And that's when the relationship first starts being tested, right? So you need that 10 or 12 pages, 15 minutes of story that you're watching to emotionally connect to the friendship, right? You are between 12 and 25, you are getting connected to Harry and Sally's connection. Like you are saying, like, I like these two together. They're good friends to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I like
You start rooting for
mentioning,
them.
right. Yeah, you want to see this uncommon relationship come together. And the same thing with Dumb and Dumber. These two guys are knuckleheads, but they're each other's knucklehead, and we always kind of root for those like we want to see those people get together, right? And so this is also in this 12 to 25 page piece when we're setting up these storylines. This is also where you get introduced to these quirky side characters, right? The hitman, the waitress, the in Dumb and Dumber, Jess and Marie in the opposite couple and When Harry Met Sally, right? This is where you start to know that Harry has a friend named Jess who he goes to football games with and plays baseball with, and that Marie and Sally are it's a little dated when it comes to like what the female characters do. They walk around and talk about the men that they're trying to marry, but like we see that they have friends.
Mhm.
And they are opposite characters to our main two, right? Marie is a little more down to earth than Sally is, and Jess is like wisecracking and like and I don't know. Bruno Kirby's a great actor. I can't even depict what Bruno Kirby does other than like he's just a wisecracker, and he's a little less eggheaded than Harry is. He's a little more like, he's funny. He's definitely more curious about women than Harry is, who thinks that Harry thinks he knows it all. So this is where you start to set up the like, okay, here's gonna be our contrasts, right?
Mhm.
And we set that up in that 12 to 25. Now, 25 to 30, we break into Act 2. This is where, now that we've established this relationship, we're going to take that central theme of the story and we're going to start putting it to the test, right? And I should have said that the central theme in When Harry Met Sally is, can men and women be exclusively friends, right? That's he says that in the car. He says men and women can't be friends because the relationship always gets in the way. And she says, I don't believe that's right. So the
Mhm.
whole story from 25 on is the test of that theory. Because now that they're friends, they're in this friendship, and one of them believes it's possible and the other one doesn't. And we're going to see that. So now we talk about in a script, you talk about broader strokes, right? So it gets less and less specific as we get into between page 25 and or 30. The act break happens right in there, and page 55, which is kind of the midpoint, it's what we call fun and games, right? There is the fun and games element of the relationship of the story where we see how that theory is tested in fun ways, right? We see we see how that happens in fun. It's called fun and games. If you look at like script structure, like that portion's traditionally called fun and games. And that's when, when Harry and Lloyd are doing their hijinks, right? They're on these capers together.
Mhm.
There's not a there's risk, but they always seem to get away with it, right? They
Mhm.
they 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 stay one step ahead of the hitman, right? They're staying one step ahead of their own stupidity, right? It's
Yeah,
in Dude,
yeah.
Where's My Car? It's the same thing. Like they're just lost up until the midpoint in Dude, Where's My Car? They're just lost and drunk and hungover and looking for a car. That's all. And things are happening, but like it's just the funny part. And the same
Mhm.
thing when Harry Met Sally between 25 and 50, they're their relationship is growing. They're talking about like, they're comfortably talking about dates. They're comfortably talking about, um, relationships that they're having, and they're able to do the whole like, oh, Harry, you're so this. Oh, Sally, you're so that. They're putting that whole theory to the test in that time, but there's not a lot of risk to it, right? There's just not a lot of risk to how that's going to play out. So we get the kind of like, this builds up our hope still because we think like, wow, this whole thing could work. Maybe the conceit in the whole story is true. Maybe men and women can be friends. Maybe this relationship between these two knuckleheads can survive the dumb things they get themselves caught up in, right? But the
So
midpoint, go ahead.
sorry, I want to ask you. So I heard you, I thought you contradicted yourself. So is there risk?
Probably
You're
did.
showing this, they're testing it in fun ways with risk or without risk yet?
There's risk, but they're able to get over it, right? This is
Okay.
the scene in When Harry Met Sally where Harry's kind of talking crudely about having sex in a kind of a one night stand, and she's kind of like, "Ugh, you're so that." So like
Okay.
his the way he treats women or the way he thinks of women, which is very limiting in that story, is it's coming out, but it's not at that point showing any risk to their friendship because she's able to say, whatever, you're terrible.
Hmm.
So the risks are minimal. But what
Okay.
happens in a story in is this the midpoint. And the midpoint is the most important portion of to me it's the most important portion of the plot. Not the most important portion of the story because the character is the most important portion of the story. But if you've gotten your characters, you get them to this midpoint in the story where, right? Now things are serious. Something happens at the midpoint of a story where suddenly the fun and games of the last 25 minutes, there's a little more risk to it, right? And when Harry Met Sally, it's a beautifully done. It's when Jess and Marie get married, right? It's when these are their friends, and everybody's living this kind of like dating life, and they're in New York City, and they're eating bagels, and they're walking around pretending to be Woody Allen. Um, I love the movie, but it is such a ripoff of the great Woody Allen. Um, but now Jess and Marie get married. And now the stakes of just being friends becomes different because the question becomes, is the preoccupation with our friendship keeping us from getting married? Are we actually putting too much energy into our relationship? And there's a moment in that movie where I think it's Marie, I think it's there's a speech and it's like sort of this like weird contradiction of the theme, but that's the moment when Sally's demeanor changes. She's the emotional lead in the story. Her demeanor changes. Like, wait, this good friendship might be risking my ultimate goal of getting married. And so then you start to see those same things happening, but there's now risk involved. Now she and you can see because Meg Ryan was a great actress at that time and she plays the part really well. You can see like there's this other gear that she's in. Am I risking this my long-term happiness with another man
Hmm.
on this friendship? And the same thing happens in Dumb and Dumber. Like they get to Aspen, Colorado, and there's Lauren Holly appears, and now all of a sudden there's a romantic interest that threatens their love story,
Hmm.
right? Kind of a
Yeah.
similar thing, right? Romantic love threatens Harry and Sally's platonic love, and romantic love threatens the platonic love in the other
Uh-huh.
story. Now all of a sudden, all the things that we've seen Harry and Lloyd doing, the like antics and the craziness, now they have to do them to each other because they're competing for. I forget Lauren Holly's character's name. I just think of her as Lauren Holly. Like now those antics are there's real stakes, right? Because now they're risking their friendship to prove to get to that thing, right? And now you can see Harry and Sally's like friendship is at risk because the concept has been really tested, the central conceit of the story. All right. That happens for the next 20 pages in a script. You get from about 55 to 75 with this like now that we've tested it in a fun way, now that we've gotten past the midpoint and that moment happens where it's, the Rubicon has been crossed. Now all the risks are a little more risky. Now we see that, like, this friendship can be destroyed by romantic love. This one can be destroyed by romantic love. You get to page 75, and we'll just talk about when Harry met Sally in this one. It's because it's the most succinct way to think about it. And it is if we all remember, page 75 is the beginning of what's called the dark night of the soul in a story. It's the something happens at page 75, and it sets off this like 10 to 15 minute sequence where you kind of see a character or characters hit rock bottom. Okay. And in that movie, what is the moment that sets that off? Sally calls him up. Can you come over? The man that she was dating has now gotten married, right? So not only is her friend Jess getting married, but her ex-boyfriend's getting married. And what does Harry do? They sleep together. So now the question of can men and women really be friends has gotten the ultimate test because they've crossed that line. Like now they're not friends anymore. So it set into motion this 10-minute, 15-minute sequence of like, this thing happened and now we're going to deal with it. Like, and now we're going to see how the characters deal with it individually. We're going to see how it breaks their world apart. And it's really brilliantly done in that movie. Like if you want to watch any 15 minutes of that movie to see how it's structured, like that's the best, that's the best example because Harry's now doing the things that he did with her alone. She's doing all the things that she did with him alone. Jess and Marie are no longer a married couple in the story. Now they're friends. Now they're like, we're back to seeing the friendships working, and each of those friends are getting pep talked by their friends, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's brilliant, right? It's the whole it goes back to that 5 minute point in the movie, right? Five minutes into the movie, this is the test. Now we've seen here's what happens when it really, really, really gets pushed. Before we go into the end act, like I think it's also important to say that like a lot of what makes that so act two of a script is always very hard to write, even when you have great characters like Harry and Sally and Lloyd and Harry. Like they're hard to write because you are essentially, I mean, I hate to say that like act two is simply trying to get from act one to act three, but sometimes it feels like that. Like, how do I keep the audience entertained long enough to execute on my idea? Because it needs to be 90 pages. The whole idea of like the iconic moments in those movies always come from act two and three, or sorry, act two. You can argue that there's 4 acts in a story, but we'll just call it act two for this, right?
Okay.
When Harry met Sally, right? The diner scene, right? When the woman like she fakes the orgasm in the thing.
What page is
And
that on?
I'll have what she's having. That was probably in that was in act two. That was after the midpoint. Sorry. Because
Okay.
that's not just a funny iconic scene. That's actually like introducing this like the knowledge of sexuality to these characters, even though they know that
Mm-hmm.
they're both sexually active. It introduces like the idea in the viewer's head that these characters are going to be, that there's a sexual element now introduced. That we've seen them see each other respond to sexual stimulus, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's played for laughs, but that's when it happens later on. It's not new. It's like now you're seeing, you're seeing something you've seen before in a new way. Think
Mm-hmm.
about like the most annoying sound in the world scene from when
Oh
when Harry
yeah.
met Sally. That happens in early in act two, right? It's just them, the snowball fight that happens, the poison burger. Like those little iconic, like unforgettable moments are what keeps the act two of the story moving along. It keeps
Okay.
it going.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So, I mean, the emotion, we'll just kind of like look at the ending, and the endings execute in different ways. The act threes can be very different, but the emotional payoff at the end is sort of that act three is always like, what do the characters do with when they broke the relationship? How do they fix it? Like act three is always about repair. Okay. Harry and Lloyd do increasingly damning, and hurtful things to try to win Lauren Holly's affection. How do they survive that? They answer that question in their way. How do Harry and Sally go from people who have an emotionally charged hookup to a couple who is, creates a sustaining relationship um, that ultimately the movie ends on, right? So there is that, like, the dark night of the soul ends, right? We kind of come out of that moment where Harry's, depressed and Sally's depressed, and they both kind of move on with their lives, and we see the new way, and they move on with their lives, but it's not perfect, right? Because they are missing each other. So essentially, the ending of those movies, I mean, when Harry Met Sally is the perfect climax of a film because, like, it's New Year's Eve. It's at a New Year's Eve party. It riffs on the motif from earlier in the movie where they say to each other, "Well, if we don't have anyone to kiss next year on New Year's, we'll kiss each other." Right? They said that as friends, but now that we come to the heartwarming ending, they are really facing that reality, right? And so
Hmm.
everything in that movie comes to that. In fact, like, it's so perfectly stated. Harry basically says, like, I said this thing in Act One, I showed you this in Act Two, and now I'm willing to prove it in Act Three. And
Hmm.
then they kiss, and the movie ends. It's this emotional payoff, right? Of that concept, newly newly reformed relationship that ultimately we knew the whole time was going to survive. We just see how it was going to survive, right? Dumb
Hmm.
and Dumber are very similar, right? It's less dramatic, but like they both come to the realization that, like, they belong together as friends, and that this pursuit of romantic love is not more important than the connection that they have together, right? And that executes in a very um, again, you start at this, they show each other how far they can push each other, how much they can hurt each other in the pursuit of this person, and come around to realizing that they need each other more than her. And I think that's, like, so in that sense, there's so many like, you can kind of, if you really, we could sit down and break it down into, like, minute by minute, beat by beat, scene by scene, and it wouldn't exactly line up. I mean,
Hmm. They're
there
different
are
stories.
they're different stories, right? But if you look at, I mean, they both have like a road element to it, right? There is that quintessential, Harry and Lloyd going to Aspen, causing chaos. When Harry and Sally, take that road trip from Chicago to New York, it's becomes this proving ground, right? They
Hmm.
kind of both use very similar. In fact, I think that, like, in these stories, there's an element of travel, whether it's near or far, always. Dude, where's my car? Right? They're looking for a car. They have to leave the home or the crash pad. I forget where the movie even starts, but they have to go out and find the car, right?
Hmm.
Like, and now they have to leave
It's like a
the
quest.
relationship. Right. Like, they're all quest stories. It's just the relationship. Like, can the relationship survive the quest of finding the car? Can the relationship survive getting to White Castle? Like, I love that movie. I could watch that movie any time of the day. Um, like, can this relationship survive that same hot tub time machine? Like, can the relationship survive the trip through the time machine to keep the weekend going, right? It's like it's a very similar, it's very similar. It's about this, we have an uncommon love story that is put up to very familiar stake, that has unique stakes, that is put up to a very familiar test, and we see how unique people both prove themselves worthy of each other and hurt each other on the way to that resolution. I mean, Harry ultimately, like, I don't, you can argue in that movie whether he was taking advantage of her, but, like, this was a moment of, it was a mistake, and he admits it in the story, but it's how they come out on the other end and survive. How love survives the circumstances that life throws at them.
Awesome. Thanks for breaking that down in like 40 minutes. That's rad. I think this would be a great, I think you said you were maybe thinking about doing this as a class someday or like a talk at
Well,
a
my
conference or
my goal is
something.
to yeah, I think that these are two good examples. As I sat here, and was doing this, my mind kept, like, I don't know, you could do this with a you could do this with a lot of movies. And But yeah, I really think one of the things that people get caught up in, especially when it comes to long form, whether it's novels or screenplays, like there's this idea that like I think we need to get to the idea that there's more similarities than there are differences, and the idea that like you can you can watch both of these movies and understand how to tell a love story if you're
Hmm.
looking for a love story. You really know, like analyzing things isn't so much the what's on the cover or what, who's starring in it. It's what's the substance of the story, right? If you
Hmm.
watch Judd Apatow movies for like a generation, Judd Apatow movies were, sought after comedies, but if you read them, they're actually structured a little more like dramas. They're a little longer than normal comedy. So like what's the underlying structure? His genius was he took um comedic beats and he put them on a dramatic, palette. So like it's it's understanding like the underlying things and that really helps get you through the like it actually demystifies the story enough that you can write it.
That's awesome. I think this would be really great with visuals too. Like if you were to like a lot of the screen shots or little
Oh
clips
yeah.
from the movies, so you can see like, okay, in this stage, this is the midpoint, and this is, yeah. I think this would
Right.
be a great workshop. I think you should
You're upping
totally
the
do that.
production costs and production value. I like that. I like what we're doing here. Budget
I
stays the
like it.
same, production values need to increase.
All right. Well, we have run out of time, and
We are.
thank you so much for coming and talking with us about screenplays and the beats and the bromance and versus romance. That was super interesting to me, and I really like the idea of. I mean, Saves the Cat, you said was like one of the quintessential
It's the gospel.
screenplay books,
It is,
and
yeah.
a lot of people, a lot of novelists have used that to write novels too, instead of just screenplays. In fact, now they've got Saves the Cat writes a novel. So
Right,
yeah,
right.
so
Which is
this
good.
yeah,
It's
so
good.
this is good information for both screenwriters and also novelists. So
Absolutely. It's good
all
to be here.
right. See you next time. Bye for now.
See you next time. Bye bye.